Nobody wakes up planning to accidentally make things worse. And yet, history is absolutely littered with people who did exactly that. Governments, militaries, and corporations all convinced they had the winning move. Spoiler alert, they did not. I'm Michael with those 25, and these are 25 spectacular backfires throughout history. 25. Operation Pastorius. Nazi Germany was feeling pretty confident about this one. 8 trained spies would sneak into the United States via U-boat, blend into American society, and wreak havoc on the war effort. However, the scheme started crumbling before anyone even reached U.S. soil. One agent got drunk in a Parisian bar and loudly announced he was a secret operative. Classic. Then the Coast Guard stumbled across the landing party on a Long Island beach. But the real disaster came when George John Dosh, one of the traitors, had second thoughts about the whole betraying America thing. He showed up at FBI headquarters in Washington with $84,000 in cash and dropped it right on the assistant director's desk. Then, he spilled everything about the mission and everyone involved. The FBI was thrilled. Germany, significantly less so. The mission that was intended to terrorize America instead handed U.S. intelligence a complete roadmap of Nazi espionage tactics. 24. Northern Ireland's renewable heat incentive. Northern Ireland wanted businesses to switch to renewable energy, so it offered to subsidize heating costs. Sounds reasonable enough. The problem was the execution. The subsidy paid more than the cost of fuel. Businesses figured this out quickly and did exactly what you'd expect. They installed heating systems and ran them non-stop even in empty buildings because every unit of heat generated meant free money in their pockets. Some people literally left windows open while cranking the heat because wasting energy was more profitable than conserving it. The scheme burned through 490 million pounds of taxpayer money before anyone pulled the plug. The scandal became so massive that it collapsed the entire government that created it and became known locally as the Cash for Ash affair. An initiative meant to save the planet instead set public funds on fire. Just actually pretty poetic. 23. Operation Acoustic Kitty. Speaking of governments lighting money on fire, let's talk about the CIA's most embarrassing pet project. During the Cold War, someone at Langley looked at a cat and thought, that's a surveillance device waiting to happen. Operation Acoustic Kitty involved surgically implanting microphones, transmitters, and antenna wires into living cats. The theory was that these feline agents would casually wander near Soviet targets and eavesdrop on classified conversations. Anyone who's ever owned a cat already knows where this is going. Cats are spectacularly bad at following orders. They're easily distracted. They do whatever they want. During the first field test in Washington, D.C., the agency released its $1 million spy cat near a Soviet compound. But when it promptly wandered into traffic, it got hit by a taxi. The CIA burned through roughly $20 million before concluding that cats are in fact untrainable for espionage. Any cat owner could have told them that for free. 22. Soviet anti-tank dogs. The Soviets had their own animal-based military disaster, except theirs was significantly more tragic. The Red Army came up with a plan in the early 40s to strap explosives onto dogs and send them running under German tanks. They trained the dogs by placing food beneath parked tanks, teaching them to associate crawling under armored vehicles with getting fed. It seemed clever on paper. The problems were immediate and horrifying. The battlefield conditions terrified the animals, and many fled in panic rather than approaching enemy armor. But the truly fatal flaw was that the dogs had been trained using Soviet diesel tanks. But German tanks ran on gasoline and smelled completely different. When these terrified dogs hit the actual battlefield, they bolted straight for the smell they recognized. They ran back towards Soviet lines with bombs strapped to their bodies. Handlers couldn't stop them, and entire units had to retreat from their own weapon. 21. The Made in Germany label. Britain's Merchandise Marks Act of 1887 had a clear goal to protect British industry by forcing foreign competitors to label their products with the country of origin. The assumption was that British consumers would see "Made in Germany" and immediately choose the superior domestic option. German manufacturers saw the mandatory labeling as a challenge and dramatically improved their production quality. Within years, "Made in Germany" transformed from a warning label into a seal of excellence. British consumers started actively seeking out German products because the stamp now signified reliable engineering and craftsmanship. A law designed to shame German industry instead gave them a globally recognized brand. Today, "Made in Germany" remains synonymous with precision and quality, a marketing gift wrapped in perfectionist legislation. 20. China's Great Sparrow Campaign. Mao Zedong had a sparrow problem. And no, not the one named Jack. The birds were eating grain, and China needed that grain to feed its people. So, in 1958, he ordered the entire country to kill every sparrow they could find. Chinese citizens went to war against the birds. People smashed nests and set traps everywhere. Others banged pots and pans nonstop so sparrows couldn't land anywhere to rest. The birds would fly until they dropped dead from exhaustion, and hundreds of millions of sparrows were killed in just a few years. Nobody stopped to think what else sparrows ate. The birds consumed massive amounts of locusts every single day. With the sparrows gone, locust populations spiraled out of control, and swarms descended on farmland across the country. Crops that were already struggling because of bad agriculture policies got completely wiped out. The ensuing famine killed between 15 and 30 million people. Mao wanted to save grain from the sparrows and ended up starving his own country instead. 19. The Narita airport bombing timing error. Members of the Sikh extremist group Babar Khalsa coordinated twin attacks targeting Air India flights in June 1985. 2 suitcase bombs were synchronized to detonate mid-flight, one over the Atlantic and one over Japan. The Atlantic bomb worked as intended, destroying Air India Flight 182 and claiming 329 lives. However, the Japanese bomb detonated early at Narita International Airport while still on the ground. 2 baggage handlers lost their lives, but the aircraft was never in danger. The terrorists had synchronized the timers perfectly, except for one detail. Japan doesn't observe daylight savings time. 1 hour. That's all it took to unravel everything. So the early blast gave investigators the thread they needed to tie both attacks together and trace the whole thing back to its source. They'd handed law enforcement a gift-wrapped case file. 18. Aktion T4's deadly paperwork. German doctors received surveys in 1939 asking detailed questions about their patients, including disabilities, mental conditions, and ability to work. Many physicians assumed the information would be used to draft workers and believed that exaggerating their patients' impairments would protect vulnerable people from harsh labor assignments. They were catastrophically wrong. The surveys were the data collection phase of Aktion T4, the Nazi regime's systematic program targeting people with disabilities. By marking patients as completely incapable of work, well-meaning doctors had essentially flagged them for elimination. Over 70,000 people lost their lives through the official program alone, with many more perishing in decentralized follow-up operations. Physicians trying to shield their patients from forced labor had instead handed the regime a list of targets. 17. Castro's ex-girlfriend assassination attempt. Fidel Castro survived over 600 assassination attempts. This one might be the most awkward. The CIA sent his ex-girlfriend to kill him. Marita Lorenz had an affair with Castro before defecting from Cuba. The CIA figured she could get close to him again, so they gave her poison pills to hide in a jar of cold cream. Simple enough, right? Wrong. The pills dissolved before she even reached Havana. Lorenz finally came face to face with Castro, and he could tell something was off. He pulled out his pistol, handed it to her, and dared her to pull the trigger. She froze. Her hands would not stop shaking. Castro took the gun back, smiled, and told her she didn't have it in her. They spent the night together instead. The woman sent to kill him ended up in his bed. Somewhere at CIA headquarters, an agent had to explain how an assassination turned into a booty call. 16. Operation Merlin. Speaking of the CIA, they cooked up what they thought was a genius plan to sabotage Iran's nuclear program during the early 2000s. They would feed Tehran deliberately flawed blueprints through a defected Russian scientist, sending Iranian engineers on a years-long wild goose chase. One problem: the Russian scientist took one look at the blueprints and spotted the errors right away. He panicked, worried that Iranian experts would catch the same mistakes and suspect him. So he warned Iranian officials that the documents contained flaws. Iran basically received nuclear weapons information along with a note saying, "Fix these parts." An operation designed to delay their program may have actually helped move it faster. The CIA handed over classified nuclear blueprints and then watched their own asset point out exactly what needed fixing. 15. The Degenerate Art Exhibition. The Nazi regime organized dual art exhibitions in Munich during 1937. One showcased state-approved works celebrating Aryan ideals. The other displayed degenerate modernist art, expressionism, Dadaism, and abstract works, accompanied by mocking labels designed to humiliate the artists and disgust the public. Over 3 million people attended the Degenerate Art Exhibition, drawn by curiosity and fascination with the provocative works. The state-approved show? About 800,000 visitors, most of whom found the rigid, idealized pieces boring. The regime accidentally threw a massive publicity event for the very artists they were trying to suppress. People lined up to see the condemned works while largely ignoring the approved alternatives. Well, nothing drives interest like being told you shouldn't be interested. 14. The Suez Crisis Leaflet Bombs. After Egypt nationalized the Suez Canal in 1956, a military coalition decided to take it back by force. The British Psychological Warfare Unit wanted to win over the Egyptian public, so they came up with a plan to drop leaflet bombs over villages. The leaflets would explain why the invasion was actually good for everyone. Nobody thought to check the equipment. The leaflet bombs had been calibrated for British air pressure, and Egyptian air pressure is different. The bombs were supposed to burst at 300 meters and scatter propaganda across the countryside. Instead, they exploded right at head height. The Egyptians were not convinced to support the invasion, and it turned out the British colonel running the whole operation had zero training in psychological warfare. Yeah, someone probably should have looked into that beforehand. 13. Project X-Ray, the Bat Bombs. America's contribution to bizarre World War II animal weapons involved strapping tiny devices to thousands of Mexican free-tailed bats. The plan was to release them over Japanese cities at dawn and let them roost in wooden buildings before the charges ignited. During testing in a New Mexico airfield, several bats escaped early with their live bombs still attached. But rather than dispersing into test structures, they sought shelter in the nearest available buildings instead, which happened to include the base's fuel storage tanks and ammunition facilities. The bats blew up an American military base. The US military accidentally bombed itself with its own experimental weapon. Officials eventually pulled the plug on the whole project, even though some analysts thought the bat bombs could have worked better than traditional explosives. We'll never find out because the bats had other plans. 12. The Citicorp Center's near collapse. New York's Citicorp Center was an engineering marvel when it was completed in 1977, with 59 stories supported on stilts positioned at the center of each side rather than the corners. What nobody realized until a year later was that the building actually had a serious design flaw. The engineers had only planned for winds hitting the building head on. They never considered winds hitting from an angle. Making matters worse, the builders had quietly swapped welded joints for cheaper bolted ones. Put those two mistakes together, and the building had a 6% chance of collapsing in a major storm in Midtown Manhattan, with thousands of people inside. A Princeton architecture student named Diane Hartley caught the error while doing homework. Her professor passed the concern to the original engineer, who ran the numbers and realized she was right. Work crews fixed the problem in secret, welding reinforcements at night while office workers went home with no idea their building might fall down. The public did not learn about any of this until 1995. 11. The Himmler postage stamps. Someone at British intelligence thought this would work. Print fake German stamps with Himmler's face where Hitler's should be. Sneak them into Germany. Watch the Nazis turn on each other when everyone assumes Himmler is plotting a coup. The stamps made it into circulation, and then absolutely nothing happened. People just mailed their letters. No one questioned why Himmler was suddenly on their postage. No paranoia, no whispered accusations. The whole scheme went completely unnoticed. Stamp collectors are the only winners here. Those Himmler forgeries fetch serious money at auction now. Britain spent resources trying to spark a Nazi civil war and accidentally created a hot item for people who collect rare postage. 10. Baltimore's Scratch-and-Sniff gas leak campaign. Back in 1987, Baltimore Gas and Electric wanted to teach residents how to identify natural gas leaks. Their solution was to mail Scratch-and-Sniff stickers that smelled like mercaptan, a chemical added to gas for safety. However, the stickers started releasing odor while still sealed in their envelopes, causing hundreds of alarmed residents to smell gas, assume they had leaks, and call emergency services. With that, the fire departments across Baltimore were flooded with false alarms for people who had essentially been pranked by their own utility company. 9. The Pepsi number fever disaster. Pepsi ran a promotional contest in the Philippines during 1993, offering 1 million pesos to anyone who found the number 349 under a bottle cap. But due to a printing error, approximately 800,000 winning caps were produced, even though the company had originally intended for it to only be a handful. When Pepsi refused to honor all the winning caps, chaos erupted. Riots broke out across the country. Protesters firebombed Pepsi trucks. Grenades were thrown at bottling plants. Over the following months, the violence claimed 5 lives and left dozens injured. A typo in a bottle cap promotion had triggered a national crisis, and Pepsi faced years of legal battles, ultimately becoming a cautionary tale about proofreading your marketing materials, because 800,000 winners is a lot. 8. Strom Thurmond's 24-hour tantrum. South Carolina had a senator who really hated the idea of civil rights legislation. Strom Thurmond walked onto the Senate floor in August 1957 and decided he was going to talk until the Civil Rights Act died. He kept going for over 24 hours without stopping, setting a record that was only just broken in April 2025 when Senator Cory Booker spoke for over 25 hours in protest of policies from the Trump administration. Thurmond had nothing meaningful to say after the first few hours. He grabbed whatever documents he could find and just started reading them aloud. At one point, the US Senate had to sit there and listen to this man read a biscuit recipe that had been passed down through his family. Colleagues were falling asleep in their chairs while Thurmond rambled on about flour and buttermilk. The whole stunt failed miserably. Congress passed the Civil Rights Act anyway, and Thurmond became a historical punchline. He held the record for the longest one-man filibuster in American history and used it to fight against voting rights for Black Americans. That's his legacy. 24 hours of talking. And all anyone remembers is that he lost. 7. The Koch brothers climate study. In 2012, the Koch brothers funded a physicist named Richard Muller to run an independent study on global temperature data. Muller had been publicly skeptical of climate science for years, making him the perfect choice. The Kochs wanted him to poke holes in the research and give them ammunition against the scientific consensus. Muller spent 2 years analyzing temperature records from weather stations around the globe. He reviewed thousands of data points, double-checked the methodology, and came out the other side completely convinced that climate scientists had been right all along. The planet was warming and human activity was driving it. The study backfired spectacularly. Mueller held press conferences explaining how the evidence he was supposed to tear apart had actually changed his mind. The Koch brothers had paid for research that ended up validating everything they wanted to disprove. Not exactly the return on investment they were hoping for. 6. Queen Sunandha's drowning. The story begins when Queen Sunandha Kumariratana of Thailand and her young daughter were traveling by boat in 1880. The vessel capsized on the Chao Phraya River. Bystanders rushed to help, but there was a palace law that forbade anyone from touching members of the royal family. The queen and her daughter struggled in the water while witnesses stood helplessly on the bank. Rescue attempts were restrained or delayed by people terrified of violating royal protocol. As a result, both drowned within sight of potential rescuers. A law meant to protect royal dignity wound up costing 2 lives. People stood on the riverbank and watched because breaking protocol felt scarier than watching someone drown. That's what happens when rules matter more than people. 5. MI5's Gerbil security screening. During the 90s, MI5 explored using gerbils for airport security. The theory was that the rodents could detect elevated adrenaline levels in passengers, potentially identifying terrorists through their stress responses. Gerbils couldn't distinguish between someone planning an attack and someone who was simply nervous about flying. False positive rates were astronomical, and every anxious traveler registered as a potential threat. The project was scrapped after security personnel realized they'd essentially invented a system for detecting people who don't like airports. Which, to be fair, is most people. 4. Todd Marinovich's urine substitution. NFL quarterback Todd Marinovich struggled publicly with substance abuse throughout his career. So, to beat league drug tests, he developed a system of using friends' urine samples instead of his own. The scheme seemed to work. Until it didn't. During one test, Marinovich submitted a sample from a friend whose blood alcohol level was 4 times the legal driving limit. So the league officials immediately noticed something was off. Rather than escaping consequences, Marinovich's substitution attempt drew more attention than a standard positive test would have. So he was mandated to enter a 45-day rehabilitation program. Though his friend really should have mentioned the drinking beforehand. 3. The Perfect Aryan Baby Contest. In 1935, the Nazis ran a contest to find the most beautiful Aryan baby in all of Germany. So, families sent in photos from all over the country, and Gerbil personally picked the winner. That baby's face ended up everywhere. Posters, pamphlets, the whole propaganda machine. But here's where it gets good. Decades later, the truth came out. That baby? Well, he's Jewish. As it turns out, the family had submitted the photo on purpose in an attempt to dare the regime to pick their kid as the face of racial purity. And Gerbil took the bait. So the Nazis' golden child for their master race fantasy was the exact opposite of everything they stood for. They'd been showing off a Jewish baby as peak Aryan genetics for years. 2. The Gurkha propaganda disaster. In 1982, Britain sent Gurkha soldiers to the Falkland Islands, and Argentina immediately had a problem. The Gurkhas had a reputation, centuries of it, as some of the fiercest fighters on the planet, so Argentine commanders tried to get ahead of it by spreading their own stories. According to them, Gurkhas were drug-crazed cannibals who ate the people they fought. Except the rumors worked a little too well. On the wrong audience. Argentine troops soon heard about these wild stories and completely lost their nerve. Guys were panicking before they'd even seen a Gurkha in person. Whole units gave up or pulled back without a single shot being fired. The fear was doing more damage than any actual combat could. So, Argentina ran a psychological warfare campaign that ended up psychologically destroying its own army. The Gurkhas barely had to lift a finger as the enemy had already scared themselves half to surrender. 1. The Superman Landmine Comic. The US government teamed up with DC Comics in 1996 to make a special Superman issue for kids living in the former Yugoslavia. The comic was supposed to warn children about the dangers of landmines by having their favorite superhero deliver the message. It backfired horribly. Some kids read the comic and walked into minefields thinking Superman would show up and save them if anything went wrong. The story had accidentally turned a deadly situation into an adventure where a superhero might swoop in at the last second. Children were injured. Some died. A safety campaign designed to protect kids ended up putting them in danger. The people behind the project meant well, but using a fictional hero to warn kids about real explosives sent exactly the wrong message. History really is just one long series of people being absolutely certain they've figured everything out, only for reality to deliver a brutal correction. From spy cats getting hit by taxis to propaganda campaigns that terrified the wrong army, the lesson is clear. Confidence and competence are not the same thing. What's your most spectacular backfire? Let me know in the comments below. And if you enjoyed watching Humanity's Greatest Fails, click here for 25 secrets the history books left out. Hit that like button, subscribe if you haven't already with the notification bell, and I'll catch you in the next one. See ya.